Well, in Alzheimer's disease, what slowly happens is that the part of the brain that stores short-term memory starts to degenerate. So even though we call it a memory disease, it's really as much or more a learning disease, because every single moment you're taking in sensory information. You're hearing things, seeing things, smelling, tasting, touching. And that sensory information has to be stored somewhere immediately. And so it literally goes to one part of the brain. It's called the hippocampus, which is Greek for seahorse, because it looks like a seahorse. And over time in Alzheimer's, because of the pathology, literally the nerve cables, so to speak, that bring you your short-term memories gets dissolved. So first, it's hard to keep track of what's happened over the last half hour, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, all the way down to 10 seconds. So with time, you start to lose that continuity of time. You also lose the context of where you are, of space. So if you're experiencing the world, but you can't put it in context of what you already know, you're not learning, right? Because learning, by definition, is associating new things with what you already knew. And if you can't keep track of what you've experienced over 10 seconds or 5 seconds time, that continuity is gone. And on one hand, it sounds nice for someone seeking a Zen experience. You're living in the moment. But if you can't come out of that and have the self-awareness that you just experienced, a blissful non-local event, no one's home, then you have to ask, what good is it? And so self basically becomes the continuity of you and your memories and all your experiences over time and space. And if you can no longer register such information as learning or make new memories, self is gone. So self requires local consciousness in time and space. This is what you lose eventually in Alzheimer's disease. And I would imagine when you finally lose it all, we don't know how the patients feel, but on the way, as you might imagine, it's horrific to be sitting in a room with people and everybody's speaking, and you just can't keep track of what they said from 5 seconds ago till now. And so it can be quite terrifying in experience. When we talk about the cognitive self, we think about learning and memory, and you have a foundation of experiences from infancy, and every new event you layer on, you associate everything new on what you already have laid down in terms of your neural network. And that's projected into your mind. Your subconscious programs and routines that condition you as well. So we think about cognition more along the lines of learning and memory. But in terms of the conscious self, it has much more to do with self-awareness. Self-awareness is the gift we have as human primates. And you can say some non-human primates even have some level of self-awareness. They'll look in the mirror and know who they are. A cat won't do that, right? So I would argue that self-awareness is really the self, knowing that your brain is an organ that's serving the real you who's aware of having a brain. Now, ironically, the brain's allowing you to be aware of having a brain. That part of the brain is the newest evolved portion, the frontal cortex, only 4 million years old, versus the reptilian brain that just allows you to survive, fight or flight, food, reproduce. That's 400 million years old. So that one's always trying to dominate you. That gets us into trouble. And in the middle, you have the limbic system, learning and memory, short-term memory, emotion. That gets hit in Alzheimer's disease. So other parts of the brain are working. Your long-term memories are there. Your most ingrained memories, your day you got married, the day your child was born, you can kind of resort to those long-term memories if you're not able to store short-term memories. But in all of that, what's lost is self-awareness. And self-awareness requires being aware that your brain is taking in information. So I would say being aware of being cognitive is the consciousness that's the true self. And the Alzheimer's patient, because cognition has been devastated, thus loses self-awareness as well. The self is aware that thoughts, feelings, sensations such as images and sounds and touch, taste, smell are happening. So the brain is bringing you information all the time. The brain is also bringing you thoughts and feelings, just like it's bringing you images and sensations. But it's not who you are. That's just the brain doing its job. The real you is the being that's aware that that's happening. And if that is no longer happening in real time, with continuity in time and space, then self-awareness starts to degenerate. And this is when you truly lose who you are as a person, and your loved ones and your family who love you are losing a person in front of their very eyes while they're still alive. So it can be nothing worse in terms of a disease. When we do science, we observe, we measure, and we're doing it with the brain. And when, as a neuroscientist like myself, we're using the brain to study the brain. So the answers you get tend to be limited to how. How does the brain work in terms of learning? I'm storing information. Associating, I'm bringing in new information. You know, I'm seeing a certain tree I never saw before, and I'm associating it with other trees that look like it, and I'm categorizing it in my brain, so I'm maintaining information. I'm recalling information. But I keep saying information, right? Where's the information? Information as subtle as the feeling you had the day you got married, the feeling you had when you saw your child being born. You can recall these feelings. You can actually change your breath and change your heart rate, change your blood flow, change your whole demeanor recalling a feeling. How do you code a feeling? Where's that information? There's fat, protein, and water, electrochemical signals traveling through them. How does that code information as subtle as a feeling? This is what we don't know. We can't explain that yet. We can explain the recording process, the connection process, how associations occur in one neural network, turns on another one, and recalling information in many different ways. You can remember the same thing 10 different ways, through a smell, through hearing something or seeing something. But we don't, as neuroscientists, have an answer for how information is actually encoded and stored. To answer a question in science, you first have to ask the right question. So far, most are not asking the question. They're assuming that the information can somehow be conjured up with fat, water, and protein and electricity. So maybe it's true. Maybe 100 billion nerve cells and hundreds of trillions of connections, up to a quadrillion in some, is enough to encode information like a subtle feeling. Or when I recall right now, my daughter's face in my mind, right? Where was that JPEG stored? How is it stored? Maybe someday we'll figure it out, and maybe it is all in the brain. But right now we have to be open to the possibility that it's stored differently. It's stored that these qualia, as they're called, experiences, stored in consciousness, the brain itself being an assembly of consciousness, which brings up the whole question of, is there really a material world at all? Is there a material brain? Is all of this just in consciousness? And, when I was a kid, my twin sister and I would play this game where we'd try to imagine there was nothing. We would picture the world, and we had a really tough time picturing a world that existed here and then it ended, and then there was nothing. We said, how could that be? So we said, well, let's picture there was absolutely nothing. And you just focus on it and focus on it. And when you're kids, you love adrenaline rushes. You go on a roller coaster to get your stomach to flip. You watch a scary movie because when you get scared, you get the stomach flip. And we would play this game and we would try to really, really think about nothing until our stomachs flipped. And then we say, mine flipped. Oh, mine didn't yet, wait. And then mine flipped. And we play this game. And then I've always thought about that the rest of my life and said, is believing in a world full of actual material trinkets that float around in some magical house that has walls around it called the universe, is that any different than believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny? And so it's easier to believe, instead of coming up with a way to believe matter, material, somehow came out of nothing and it's somewhere and then there's nothing, and that's kind of tough to take as a scientist. So I think as a scientist, I have to say, it makes much more sense if it all just exists in consciousness. And then you have to start thinking about this organ that allows you to be conscious as something that is only existing in consciousness. And then you get to the realization that all of this is awareness, being aware of being aware. The brain being an assembly of consciousness that's conscious of consciousness. Now, do you then split? Do you split the brain from what it's conscious of? No, it's all just in consciousness. And that's when non-duality surfaces to someone thinking about this scientifically, and you now have to rethink how the brain works and how the mind works. Do I have any idea how to address this experimentally in a lab? No. Do I know what questions to ask? No. Do I think about it all the time? Yes. And at some point, we'll know how to ask the right questions, and we'll get to answers about this. But right now, we can only think about what makes most sense. And for me, it makes much more sense that there isn't some magical house called the universe with actual material trinkets floating around in it, which is the view of most of us. So if you ask a neuroscientist, the mind is the product of the brain. A bacterium in media in a dish has a mind, in that it's getting positive attraction signals to come here and eat and mate, and it's getting other signals that say, I'll die if I go here. There's always some level of attraction and repulsion, or in us, fear and desire. But, so there are different ways to project different types of minds from matter in the view of traditional science. So if you go by a strictly traditional neuroscience point of view, we'll keep reducing the brain down to smaller and smaller bits. We'll keep looking at the brain as a large connected entity. There's the Connectome Project, the brain mapping project. And the hope and expectation of traditional neuroscience is someday we'll figure out how a lot of neurons firing together in closed circuits can recreate the feeling you had the day your child was born. I'm open-minded. Maybe that will happen. Maybe we're on the course to do that, and maybe for those of us who try to think that there must be something else and that information is stored separately, the brain is just a radio taking in information. Information's only in consciousness. Maybe we're dreamers. Maybe we're just romantics. Maybe we're just wrong. I think as a scientist, you have to just first start from the assumption that you don't know. And it's okay not to know. It's almost like, Alcoholics Anonymous. You have to admit it. I'm a scientist and I don't know. And then you start speaking. And, all I'm saying is because we don't know, let's cover both possibilities. Let's cover the possibility that if it is all just consciousness, and the brain is an assembly within consciousness, it is perhaps just a radio, that the music is outside. Mozart doesn't live inside your head, right? Mozart doesn't live inside of a radio, that the music is outside and the brain is bringing you your world. The brain is projecting your world on a screen called your mind. That you, the true you, is awareness that's been organized and assembled into a certain assembly, for lack of a better word, of consciousness, and that you, as awareness, are navigating a sea of consciousness, and you're using this brain to do that. Well, just getting to that point is pretty good, because at least now you're using your brain, and your brain isn't just using you. Because believe me, when your brain uses you, the big daddy is the reptilian brain. It's going to tell you, just pay attention to those 4 F's: fight, flight, food, and reproduction, right? So just getting to that point that you're using your brain, that you're navigating the sea of consciousness with your brain, and that's basically the output of that navigation is your mind, is a big step forward. How it happens, and whether it's all within that assembly of the brain, or whether it's outside the brain, if you truly believe it's all consciousness, who cares? It doesn't matter, right? So we hear people argue, no, it's not in your brain, it's outside. Well, if it's all consciousness and it's all in consciousness, I don't care how it happens. I mean, if neuroscientists figure out that that information's encoded in fat, water, and protein, and is modulated with electricity, and that's how I can recall a very subtle feeling, fine. You're still not going to change my mind that it's all just part of consciousness, not something that involves, material particles that are interacting. That's a model. The summary is that consciousness is produced, that your consciousness is produced by your brain, or the brain is just a radio for consciousness, and just receiving and transmitting it to you. And I don't think that's such a critical argument, because if you believe it is all just in consciousness, it doesn't matter how you're being brought your specific universe and the role of the brain in doing so. Where it gets debatable is when you start thinking about telepathy, or you think about experiences you've had you can't explain. I think for anybody, probably most people who are at this conference at SAND have probably had an experience or 2 or 3 that they absolutely cannot explain, in which somehow their own consciousness, even if it's produced by the brain, tapped into the consciousness of others, or other places or times, or in dreams, or if you want to call them out-of-body experiences. I think those are just lucid dreams, that have had experiences where they can't explain some event where you foretold what was going to happen in the future, or you had an experience in the future you already fully experienced in a lucid dream. That's what I've done. I've had multiple lucid dreams that I can't explain, that exactly put me in events that I experienced a day or a week later. Well, one of the fun ones was, I like the Grateful Dead. So I was, lucid dreaming versus vivid dreaming, first of all, is not just a very, very vivid dream that seems like it's real, where you're still in the third person. Lucid dreaming is where you actually choose to wake up in the dream, and you know you're awake, and you say, okay, I'm going to look at my hands, okay, I'm going to stomp the ground, and it's not just going to be vision. I can actually stomp the ground and feel touch. I pick up some dirt and taste it, and say, oh, I can taste dirt. In other words, you're there, and you choose to do things and experience all of your senses in the dream, which is not often the situation in a dream. Vivid dreams are much more usual, where you're the third person. So I had a lucid dream where back when I first started lucid dreaming, it's kind of like being a kid. When you first start lucid dreaming, you're like growing up in those dreams, and you're a kid, and you just want to fly around and do crazy things. And then over time, you learn to kind of be more constructive and use those lucid dreams to learn new things and explore your own consciousness and talk to the people in the dream and see what they have to say. That's where the fun really is. But in the old days, I used to fly around. And I was flying around, and I flew, and you can fly through walls. So that's really fun because you can actually go through walls and doors, and you feel that weird little feeling when you do that. This is all fun stuff, recreational. And so I flew through a ceiling of some room, and there I was there was a stage, and it was the Grateful Dead. I knew telepathically in the dream, because most of these feelings in lucid dreams are telepathic, that this was the Grateful Dead's equipment packed up, ready to go onto a truck. And there was the Hammond B3 organ, which I play. I play B3 organ for Joe Perry and for Aerosmith now and then. I do that on the side. And I said, wow, there's Pigpen's B3. Pigpen was the original organist for the Grateful Dead, who died long ago. So there was a rope, and I jumped over the rope in a lucid dream. And even though the organ wasn't plugged in, I played the song Love Light by Grateful Dead on the organ, and in the dream I could hear it in my head. I said, this is really fun. And then I woke up. Because if you get too excited and emotional, you pop out of a lucid dream. You have to stay very calm and sober. So then, a week later, I went to go review a science program at Case Western University in Cleveland. And a colleague of mine during lunch said, hey, let's go check out the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we took a walk over there, and he was British, and he was attracted to all the Beatles stuff, and I like the Beatles too, but I happened to have a Grateful Dead exhibit. All kinds of stuff, Grateful Dead. And I went into this one room in the back, and there's the stage, there's the packed up equipment, exactly. I looked up at the ceiling, duplicate. There's the organ exactly in the same spot next to the blue carrying case. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And that was probably the first one I ever had where it was like so overt. So I looked around, any cameras here, nothing, and I said, I got to do this. And I climbed over the little red velvet rope. This is in real life now. I went to that organ and played Love Light on the organ. Of course, I couldn't hear it, but I said, I got to complete the dream. And that was like one of the coolest things that ever happened to me. And there have been others. There have been others. These days, I use lucid dreaming mainly for research purposes. I've kind of grown up a little bit. So when you're in a lucid dream, most of the people don't see you. And I used to, when I was a child in my lucid dreams, I would fly around them and go, hey! And you might get them to at least go, like, flinch a little bit, but they didn't see you. And then there'd be certain beings in the lucid dreams who see you. And they make eye contact with you. And some of them don't want you there. That's why I thought that movie that they had with dreaming, I forgot the name of it. Inception. That's why I thought the movie Inception was so good, because they actually had the beings who were trying to kick you out. And in that movie, it was supposed to be from your subconscious. In real lucid dreaming, there are beings that try to kick you out. And I used to fight with them. And now I just learned that if you don't have any fear and you keep completely calm and sober and stay unemotional, they just go away. So I don't have to deal with them anymore. But there are other beings who want to interact with you. And so now in lucid dreams, there are quite a few characters who are recurring. And they all know about certain things. There's a woman who tells me how to behave in a lucid dream. I first met her when she got really upset because I was screaming and yelling at the people who couldn't see me. And she said, leave them alone. You're scaring them. They're very fragile. You shouldn't be doing that. And she told me nicely, but she said, stop it. So I never did it again. And but there's one fellow, older man, who tells me what I need to know about my science. And it's strange. I mean, he helped me find genes. He's helped me with questions about what ancient, herbal remedies or Ayurvedics to use in the lab to try and test for effects on Alzheimer's. And I have an active program looking at Ayurvedics like ashwagandha, which I had never heard of before a dream. And you could say, well, subconsciously you heard about ashwagandha and it popped up in a dream. I don't care how it happened. I don't care. It doesn't have to be romantic and mystical. It just has to be the fact that you can lucid dream and access that information and it's meaningful. So I use it. So I don't take a stand. Same thing about how the brain works. I don't take a stand on whether it's all inside your brain or whether there's some magical world outside you're tapping into in a more romantic way. As long as it works, as long as you can access it and it's fun and it's instructive, and so that's, so I do this often. Well, it's difficult to explain how and I think others think about it. You're never alone. If you think about in consciousness, there's information and interactions. And if you also believe that time and space can be eliminated under certain circumstances, then you would have to say that in infinite possibilities, there's a sea of consciousness where every interaction has already occurred. That it's already completely written. Everything's done. So the sea of consciousness is a tapestry of every interaction is completely still and finished. And then that bums some people out because they say, well, what good is it? What do we do? Well, remember, there's no time. If you eliminate time in all of this, which is how we got to a completely, fully developed and done still consciousness, if there's no time, then while you are doing things right now, they're being done simultaneously with the whole thing being done. So the full sea of consciousness, or what we could say pure awareness, and pure consciousness, with every interaction already done, at the same time you're getting it done. So you realize the only reason we like to think about things from A to Z and being goal-oriented, and we like to think about achievement and saying, but I want to contribute to the universe. I'm going to help get it done. Oh, it's all done? Oh, man. Well, the fact is it's both. If there's no time, it's already all done, and it's getting done at the same time. So don't worry about it. You're still helping get it done. So then you say, well, what's the point? Well, what you are is that in local time and space, you're traveling as a ball of awareness, navigating the sea of consciousness, making decisions, playing probabilities, affecting probabilities and wave collapses about what's going to happen in your existence, and contributing at the same time to what's already been completed. So it's all about the journey. It's all about your journey as you, as a ball of awareness, navigate pure awareness and navigate the still sea of pure awareness of all consciousness, of every possible interaction that can possibly occur, that without time and infinite space and infinite circumstances has to have already occurred. And every time I use these words, have occurred, I'm using past tense, present perfect tense, it's because we can't express it any other way, right? We're limited with these laryngeal grunt sounds that we use to express these things. But it just says that there is a stillness, a sea of consciousness that's complete, and you are completing it at the same time because there is no time. So it's all about your journey navigating it. And so what do you have that's yours? What's the only thing you own? One thing: intention. You can intend, you can attend. Your attention and the intention that gets you there is yours and yours alone. When, where, what, and how, you don't own. Space, where, when, time, what's around you, how things interact. But why is a totally different question. Why cannot be addressed scientifically. When my students use the word why to talk about science, I'm like, they say, well, why does this protein go from the nucleus to the cell membrane? Why? I mean, why? It's how. You're asking how. Why is something we can ask because we're self-aware. We can think about why we do things. We can choose what we want, where we want to place our attention, on what we want to place our attention, on whom, and we can intend what we want to do for our future intention, for our future attentions. And that basically sets your journey. Intention sets your journey for where your attention will be. That's what we own. And it's good enough. That's pretty good. Let's think about existence and what is the most primal form of existence. So take the word existence. Exist. For something to exist, something has to be aware that it exists. If you think about it, before existence, there's awareness, because existence is an output. Existence is a product of awareness. And we can debate it. But if you think about existence as an output and a product of awareness, first, there's pure awareness. So if we think about the most primal thing that exists, it would have to be awareness. And awareness can only be aware of one thing, the only thing that exists, awareness. So pure awareness is simply the starting point. And I don't want to use references to time and origin, but you have to meditate on this and then make your decision up. I have, and I made this decision, that before existence, there must be awareness. It's the same reason why, as a scientist, I can't accept energy and matter emanating from nothing. So if we want to think about existence versus nothing, you only have to inject awareness.
Where does that come from?
Awareness is the most primal thing there is. That if you want to use the word God, that's fine. God as pure awareness that can only be aware of the only thing that exists at that point, awareness. And now when you start thinking about awareness being aware of itself, you're emanating, let's call them balls of awareness that go out to be aware of themselves. And they can come in many different forms. They can be in the forms of what our models suggest are particles or electrons or photons. They can be bacteria. They can be fruit flies. They can be us. They can be beings as far beyond us as we are beyond bacteria in terms of the amount of self-organization of the system. In that aspect, you think about the earth as a being. You think about the universe as a being. You think about the universe, if you believe Big Bang and Big Crunch, a reincarnating universe. Universe generates all kinds of information, just like we do, in a sea of consciousness that's already done at the same time that it's done. The universe doesn't lose information. Stephen Hawking tells us information stored in black holes. Universe expands, crunches. The next universe is just that much different because now it has the information from the last one. So not much different than us, a reincarnating universe. And then who knows what's beyond that? So if you think about it this way, it's all about information coming from interactions that are infinite and awareness being aware of awareness generating those interactions. I am aware of the interviewer and creating an interaction that's generating information. Information is being shared right now on a video. None of this information will be lost in consciousness. This is what's generated. The tricky part is understanding that all of it's already been generated and it's being generated at the same time because time doesn't really exist. If you take non-local consciousness as being the real, entity, and this aspect of awareness, just pure awareness is non-local. As soon as awareness becomes aware of itself, there's a then and a now. There was before it was aware of itself and after. Now you've created time. And it had to happen somewhere, so out of space. That's where we live. We're awareness being aware of awareness, with the root being pure awareness, which I would call God. But people don't like that sometimes because they think you're saying God, some guy with white hair up in the sky. This is pure awareness as the beginning. And even the beginning doesn't work, right? If you don't believe in time. But pure awareness as being the primal entity. I'm a pantheist. I believe all matter has some level of all what we call matter has some level of consciousness because it interacts with even a particle, even an electron. It's attracted, it's repulsed. It's hard to say that there's intention there. And maybe it's a fallacy for me to think I have intention. Maybe I have as much intention as a photon that bounces away as a proton that bounces away from an electron. But I think that consciousness at the very root level is awareness being aware of itself, generating events in consciousness until you have a full sea of consciousness. And that's what correlates with pure awareness. That's in non-local space. It's so hard to say what life is. It always used to blow my mind when in the lab, I could take inert DNA, inert proteins, mix them together with some liquid in a tube, sit back, listen to some good music, and wait, and make a virus. Now that virus, in this case it was for a bacteria, that virus will now, he's off and running. He'll attach to a bacterium, integrate, go into the bacteria's DNA, replicate himself, wipe out a whole colony of bacteria in 20 minutes. He's on the run. 2 hours before, it was inert DNA, protein, and liquid thrown together in a test tube. Is that life? Well, no, the biologists would say no, because it's not breathing. We're always very human-centric. Everything has to be defined by us. It's not breathing like we do, so it's not life. But who cares, right? I mean, it's still an entity that's replicating itself, maintaining itself. So isn't that what life does? Isn't life in some cases just the ability of an assembly of matter, or you could say an assembly of consciousness that's able to maintain existence and replicate and continue? Well, what doesn't do that? So at some point, life becomes a kind of a meaningless term. And instead of using the word life, we just have to think about it as a state of awareness, as a particular assembly of consciousness. And then you can start asking, how about the difference between a squirrel and a human? Well, do squirrels ask why? I don't know. Do we ask why? Yes, we do. So we've entered this stage of evolution where we can ask why. It's probably the most amazing thing that we can do. We're not just automatons of when, where, what, and how. We can ask why. We can have intention. We can place our attention in certain spots. So if you take pure awareness, once you give pure awareness attention, you have consciousness. If someone's unconscious, they can still maybe have the ability to be aware, but there's no ability to have attention. The brain is active, but it's not connected. So it can't intend or attend. It can't have attention. So it all becomes very nuanced when you start digging into exactly what is meant by awareness, consciousness, attention, intention, and what kind of vector are we on versus when we think back to a squirrel or all the way back to a bacterium or back to a virus that I can make in a test tube in a lab down to a single particle. And I think history has shown us that whenever we've been human-centric, we've been wrong, right? We wanted to say that everything revolved around the earth because we're here. Wrong. I mean, and it's not going to end. The best way to do science is to simply remember that when you're human-centric about your conclusion, you're wrong. You have to extrapolate down and up and take the ego out of it, and then you're going to do the right science.